Hello everyone, myself Biplab Bhattacharya and I welcome you all in this course Introduction to Sequence Stratigraphy. And as we have discussed in the previous class about different types of stratigraphy, so in this class, in continuation to the previous discussion, we will try to understand what are the advantages of sequence stratigraphy over lithostratigraphy. So in the previous class already we have seen that lithostratigraphy is that branch of stratigraphy where we are more concerned about the rock type irrespective of any other parameters. So, lithostratigraphy defines the rock units on the basis of lithology, which is very often completely discards the interpretation of any depositional environment which may be associated with that. So, in case of lithostratigraphy, we are primarily concerned about the variation in the rock units. In contrast to that, in case of sequence stratigraphy, it defines the rock units based on the event significance of their bounding surfaces. That means that when we are looking into a sequence stratigraphic model or a succession in terms of sequence stratigraphic approach, there we try to define the rock units in terms of the event which is responsible for the formation of that particular rock unit. And not only that, we are also concerned about when and where that event is ending up or it is getting changed into another event which is often marked by a bounding surface. So, both the event, that means the interpretation of the rock unit, and their breaks in between, both of them are equally important in case of sequence stratigraphy. In case of lithostratigraphy, we deal with the lithology of the strata and with their organization into different units based on the lithological character. So, when we look into a lithostratigraphic cross section, in majority of the times we do not require any knowledge of the paleo environment, we do not require any kind of interpretation of the paleo environment. But what we are concerned about? We are concerned about only the mapping of the lithological contacts. So, wherever we get a variation in lithology, we can put a boundary and we can define similar lithologies as one lithostratigraphic unit. So, some of these contacts can have certain meaning in terms of change in the event, change in the process, change in the sedimentary environment, and in such cases those contacts may coincide with the sequence stratigraphic surfaces. Whereas, in many other cases such surfaces in lithostratigraphy, such boundaries in lithostratigraphy may not have any such direct relation with sequence stratigraphy. So, in many cases such surfaces may reflect diachronous lateral changes of faces or no changes at all in terms of the occurrences of the faces. So, when we try to compare lithostratigraphy with sequence stratigraphy just based on lithological boundaries or lithological characters, it becomes very complicated because in case of lithostratigraphy, the event concept, the environmental concept, the interpretation part is completely absent. And in sequence stratigraphy, as we incorporate that portion, it becomes more applicable in modern scenarios. So, in sequence stratigraphy, we deal with the correlation of the Quevel stratal units. When I am saying Quevel, that means they are time equivalent, irrespective of the lateral changes of faces that commonly occur across a basin and which are bounded by nearly synchronous surfaces. This already we have seen in the last classes, where we have defined a systems tract and we are defining a systems tract based on the change in a particular phase of shoreline shift. When that shoreline shift is going on, we can have different types of faces deposited at different parts of the basin, but they are synchronous, they are Quevel because they are occurring within that particular phase of shoreline shift, and in that way they are all interrelated, which is the approach we take in case of sequence stratigraphy. In case of interpretation of the sequence stratigraphic surfaces, we commonly concentrate into two fundamental observations. Number one, the type of stratigraphic contact, whether it is a conformable contact or it is an unconformable contact, and the second one, what is the nature of the faces. So, whenever we are talking about the faces, there comes the interpretation, the process involved in the formation of the faces. And when we look at the 3D occurrences of the faces, there comes the concept of depositional systems. So, the nature of the faces or the depositional system in 3D which are in contact across each particular surface. And when we combine these two aspects, it becomes a sequence stratigraphic architecture. The reconstruction of the paleodepositional environments is a prerequisite for sequence stratigraphic interpretation. So, this particular point makes it very distinct, makes the sequence stratigraphic approach very distinct as well as advantageous over the approach of lithostratigraphy. So, we can take one small example over here. So, for example, in an area we have a log, vertical log, and in that log maybe initially we can have some sand shell alternations, maybe some sand shell alternations with very distinct marine features. This is gradually changing into, as we are going up, gradually the proportion of shell is increasing with little bit of sand, then we get a very thick shell unit, then again sand appears over here within the succession, again it is alternating with some shell, again some sand, again some shell, and finally a very thick sand unit. So, if I look into this succession, say this vertical thickness is around, say this is a 5 meter thick succession or maybe 10 meter thick succession. This is the scale for 10 meter. So, it is around 100 meter thick succession. So, within this succession, in this lower part, we are getting dominantly one type of lithological characteristic irrespective of looking into the environment part. Definitely we can define this one as one boundary over here in terms of lithological variation. So, this can be say formation A. Now, if we look into this portion, this middle portion, here dominantly we are getting some shell with very minor amount of sand. So, in terms of again the lithological character, we can call this one as a or identify this one as another formation, and then this upper part where it is dominantly sand with very less amount of mud or shell, we can call this one as another formation, maybe the formation C. When we are defining these units as formation A, formation B, formation C, we are not concerned about the processes involved, we are not concerned about in which environment they are forming. But if we look into the environment part now, maybe this entire portion is deposited in a marine environment, whereas this top portion is deposited in a fluvial environment. So, when I am adding this interpretation part, the environment part, now it is appearing in a different way to us. So, this lower portion where we have already defined formation A and formation B actually have formed within similar kind of environment, though the processes were different. Now, if we think that why the processes were different, that may be because of change in the sea level condition, maybe some fluctuation in the sea level. So, maybe during this particular phase, we can have one type of depositional setup, during this particular phase another sort of depositional setup within the same marine basin. That means, maybe the water level has just fluctuated. So, earlier our boundary was here in terms of formation A and formation B, but now when I am trying to interpret in terms of process, maybe the boundary will come somewhere here, because now we can see there is a changeover from this point onward. So, in this part it is dominantly sand, but that sand is separated with thin mud or shell units. In this portion, it is a dominantly mud unit, but initially there are some sand units which are gradually fading out, and towards the top part again the sand units are appearing. So, definitely there is some changeover in terms of process, in terms of depositional mechanisms are going on. So, we cannot just blindly put boundaries like defining this formation A, formation B or formation C. So, what can we do when we look from sequence stratigraphic approach? We will put one boundary over here in this part. So, that boundary may be indicating, say for example, just I am taking some name, maybe some low stand condition. On that, maybe this portion up to this is the transgressive portion. Commonly we can define different system strats over here. So, maybe this is a TST part, maybe this is the LST part, and then from here onward we are getting gradually a coarsening upward pattern, where within the cell gradually the sand units are coming up. So, maybe this portion is an HST part, high stand system strat, and then we are coming into a completely fluvial part, which may be the falling stage part or maybe the next LST part. So, very clearly we can get a change in the sea level condition. So, definitely up to this portion we are getting a rise in the sea level up to this HST portion, and maybe within this fluvial part there may be a fall or may not be that kind of rise. So, when we are trying to compare lithostratigraphy versus sequence stratigraphy, we get a completely different scenario for the same succession. So, formation A, formation B, formation C that we are defining within this particular succession can come up with a completely different meaning, and maybe they do not show such kind of distinct changeover or drastic changeover in terms of change in process. So, the boundary between formation A and formation B may not be that much of importance in terms of change in process, because the process was continuous. What is the major change? Just the supply of sand is to mud, that has changed because of gradual decrease in energy or maybe gradual rise in the water level. So, maybe the major changeover is somewhere here, which is actually indicating a changeover from fining upward to coarsening upward pattern in the stacking pattern of the succession. So, that kind of changeover brings up more emphasis on the processes, more emphasis on the depositional environment, and that is the approach for sequence stratigraphy. So, the same succession having these three formations can appear completely different when we look into that from sequence stratigraphic approach. So, as a result of that, when we are looking at these different successions from sequence stratigraphic specs, we can have several different interpretations. We can take another example over here. When we are implying the sequence stratigraphic concept over lithostratigraphic units, many times we get a cross-cutting relations between them. Again, we can take one example over here. Say for example, these are the time planes, horizontal time planes. So, basically time is increasing in this direction. Now, across this area, maybe we are getting one litho contact is going on like this. Say this is formation A. We have another litho contact going on like this. Maybe this is formation B, and maybe this is formation C. So, three different litho units. So, from this diagram, what I am getting is, say if this is time t0. So, at point time t0, this is the domain for deposition of formation A. For example, say this is sandstone dominated, this is a kind of heterolith unit, and this is purely cell dominated. So, at time t0, what we are getting over here, this much of area is sand dominated, or rather this much of area is covered by conditions where sand is dominantly deposited. So, energy condition is relatively higher, maybe we can think of a shore environment. Then we are coming to this portion at the same time plane, but there we are getting heterolith unit. So, that means the energy condition is little bit less, maybe the offshore area, maybe the offshore transition area, and then the outer part where dominantly cell is getting deposited over here at the same time frame, maybe the self area. Now, if I come over here, say time t1, at this time t1, time has progressed from t0 to t1. So, at this time t1, what we are getting, the area for sand deposition has changed. The area or zone where heterolith was getting deposited has changed, and same for the cell. So, now if I try to interpret that in terms of the environment, so the self environment from here, so it is gradually migrating in this direction. The shore environment, maybe the shore face, is gradually migrating in this direction. Up to which point it is migrating? Up to this point. So, maybe that is say T5. So, starting from T0 to T5, all the depositional conditions, they are migrating towards the landward direction, one direction. So, basically what we are getting is a kind of shoreline shift. So, we can call this particular zone from T0 to T5, that can be considered as one unit within sequence stratigraphy, commonly a systems tract as per definition of systems tract. So, this is one systems tract. Same will be applicable over here. So, this much per unit, another systems tract, and same for the top part. So, definitely these lines that I am drawing over here, which are going parallel to the time planes, they are actually defining the change in the depositional condition across the basin due to certain events like shift in the shoreline, like rise in the sea level, like fall in the sea level. And when I am drawing these boundaries, they are cross-cutting the lithological units or the lithostratigraphic units. So, all these boundaries of the systems tracts are actually cross-cutting formation A, formation B and formation C. So, in terms of lithostratigraphic terminology, lithostratigraphic definition, there is no problem with formation A, formation B and formation C, but it is not representing to us or it is not portraying to us the nature of changeover in terms of events and processes that has occurred in that particular basin. When you are taking this approach of sequence stratigraphy, it is coming up with a completely different history. So, that is the advantage of sequence stratigraphy over lithostratigraphy. So, definitely for sequence stratigraphy, phasis analysis is very much crucial, very much critical, as we have to understand the processes. We have to understand what is the dominant control during deposition of a particular litho unit. So, phasis analysis, including interpretation of the depositional environment, is very much critical to sequence stratigraphy, and for lithostratigraphy it is not at all required, because in lithostratigraphy we are just separating out in terms of the rock characters. So, based on phasis analysis and when we interpret those phasis types based on these events and the processes, we can determine or define several higher frequency transgressive regressive cycles, which can be identified within the sequence stratigraphic framework. Now, these transgressive regressive cycles that we have not discussed so far in this particular course, maybe in a later class we will definitely discuss about that transgressive regressive cycles. So, basically it is associated with the shift of the shorelines towards the land or towards the sea, and accordingly we get different type of sedimentary successions formed under these different phases. Now, before we end this particular class, very quickly we can go through the allostratigraphy part. In the last class we discussed about allostratigraphy, but not in detail. So, very quickly, as we are comparing lithostratigraphy with sequence stratigraphy, it will be a good option that we should also look at the allostratigraphy in this context. So, allostratigraphy is a stratigraphic discipline which is intermediate in scope between lithostratigraphy and sequence stratigraphy. If you can remember, allostratigraphy, in the last class we discussed about that allostratigraphy or the allostratigraphic units are the mappable body of rock which are defined and identified on the basis of bounding discontinuity surfaces, maybe allo formation, member, allo group. This already we have discussed in the last class. So, in this case, for allostratigraphic unit, we are not defining the units based on lithological contrast, but we are trying to identify the bounding discontinuity surfaces. So, definitely it is little bit more than lithostratigraphy, but we are not interpreting as we are doing in case of sequence stratigraphy. So, the bounding discontinuities, which is the key point or the key word in defining the allostratigraphic unit, is commonly represented by any mappable lithological contact with or without a stratigraphic hiatus associated with it. So, any kind of changeover, any kind of break in the succession, which may be a conformable contact as well, can be considered as a discontinuity surface when we are looking from allostratigraphic approach. So, in this case, what is the problem? If there is a conformable contact, that indicates a continuous deposition process, which will not be detected in case of allostratigraphy, because in allostratigraphy all such changes will be marked as a discontinuity surface. So, in this kind of approach, all lithostratigraphic and sequence stratigraphic surfaces associated with a lithological contrast will be used for defining the allostratigraphic unit. So, in certain points it can be little bit advantageous over the lithostratigraphy, but many a times it can come up with a more complex interpretation which may not be true at all, and that is the disadvantage of allostratigraphic approach. So, allostratigraphy provides the means to take lithostratigraphy to a higher level of genetic interpretation in terms of the paleodepositional histories, because it is depending on the time significant surfaces, and when we are defining the time significant surfaces, we are trying to understand the events as well. But in allostratigraphy, the interpretation part is not that emphasized. So, as a result of that, allostratigraphy lies with the pitfall that how to define that discontinuity. When the discontinuity surface is not properly defined in terms of change in the event, allostratigraphy can come up with a very wrong interpretation, and that is why allostratigraphy or the allostratigraphic approach is not that much popular if I compare with respect to sequence stratigraphy. But definitely allostratigraphy is the base from where sequence stratigraphy can be started, because allostratigraphy helps us to identify the major changes in the lithological successions. So, in this particular class, we have tried to compare, taking some examples between this lithostratigraphic approach and sequence stratigraphic approach. I hope those are clear to you. So, these are some of the references that you can follow. So, we can have three distinct approaches: lithostratigraphy, allostratigraphy and sequence stratigraphy, and based on our discussions so far, definitely sequence stratigraphy has some added edge, some added advantage over these other branches, lithostratigraphy or allostratigraphy. So, with this I will end up over here in this particular class. Thank you everybody.